Ferrari's main strength under Fred Vasseur has been its ability to not overreact and panic, and it will need to rely on that after such a dismal start to the 2025 Formula One season. But not only that, as Ferrari ended the 2024 with a string of good upgrades. Every single upgrade and update to the SF24 in the latter stages of last season were a hit, and Ferrari hopes to keep this streak going with minimal changes to the car for the Chinese GP weekend, or which some are directly created for Hamilton. Pre-season expectations were high considering Ferrari's trajectory at the end of 2024 and the fact that it has paired Charles Leclerc with blockbuster new signing Lewis Hamilton. An uneven pre-season test in Bahrain cast doubt on Ferrari's ability to get off to a good start, although it appeared to be rather peaceful. And it looked justified when Leclerc dominated Friday practice in Australia, while Ferrari was still experimenting with the balance. Then, when it mattered most, the Melbourne weekend failed spectacularly. The optimism and expectation resulted in a RAW4 start for both cars, and a mere 5 points from a rain-soaked race that Ferrari handled poorly. The car appeared unstable and ate through its tyres in both dry and wet conditions. Ferrari's communication was frayed, and its decision-making under pressure was bad. Hamilton's much-anticipated debut was compromised and unimpressive, and even Leclerc displayed an unusual spin. In fundamental terms, the slide can be traced back to qualifying, when the SF25 ate through its rear tyres, and neither driver had adequate grip at the end of their laps, destroying their chances of winning the race. One indicator was that Ferrari was too slow to respond to the shifting track conditions on Saturday, which were extremely hot. Another theory is that Ferrari had to lift the car to avoid bottoming out too much and wearing away the plank, reducing downforce and causing skidding. Whatever the reason, overusing the tyres was a critical factor for all teams. Vasseur pointed out how Red Bull's Max Verstappen went from splitting the two McLarens to being over a second per lap slower in the race's first stint due to tyre overheating. It attributed Ferrari's problems to a lack of grip and abuse of its tyres in qualifying, which cost the team on Sunday when track position was everything. This almost certainly implies using the intermediates too aggressively. On Sunday, Leclerc said Ferrari were definitely very off in terms of pace compared to McLaren and Red Bull's Max Verstappen. However, if the car was mistakenly set up incorrectly for qualifying, Ferrari couldn't simply reverse the situation on race day. What Ferrari was left with was a firm belief that qualifying and the race did not accurately reflect the true pecking order, the capability of its car, or the team's competency. Of course, this should be the case, considering that Ferrari was out-qualified by not just its main opponents, but also a Racing Bulls and a Williams. And Hamilton had no luck passing those cars in the race, caught under Alex Albon's rear wing in the wet conditions. If Ferrari just didn't read the conditions correctly, is still finding its sweet spot, or is a combination of the two, the scenario becomes less scary. Vasseur claimed that Leclerc's Friday practice pace and early qualifying performance were much more representative of reality, and that Q3 and the race were not the real picture of the season for sure. And Hamilton said, "I do think the actual car has a lot more performance. We just didn't unlock it this weekend." Their goal is that Ferrari's performance this weekend in China will demonstrate that the scenario can be similar to the conclusion of last year, when different teams won races due to differences in circuits, track conditions, and tyre demands. Vasseur has promised that Ferrari will be much better in China, adding that this weekend would be different. An instant answer is required. And it's one thing for Ferrari to do better than in Australia, where that's the absolute minimum. The question is, how much better, given Ferrari is banking on a significant and unexpected swing against McLaren to go anything near the early leader. Vasseur agreed McLaren appeared to be one step ahead, while Hamilton admitted he had no idea if Ferrari had anywhere near the pace McLaren had. If not, it won't look much better for its title chances than the Melbourne Horror. However, as has been the case in the past when his Ferrari has faced setbacks, Vasseur's message is for the crew to focus on doing the best job they can, since that is a prerequisite whether the car is fast enough or not, which was not the case in Australia. This weekend was quite extreme for different reasons, Vasseur said. The fact it is not a permanent track, the grip is changing a lot, and these conditions, in the race, it was one of the most difficult weekends to manage. It was not a shock, but, for sure, it was not a good weekend for us. But we focus on next week and learn a lot from this weekend because we made mistakes. We need to improve the communication, understand what Lewis needs from the communication. It is only in this situation that we can be in the situation. We will be much better next week. And this goes especially for Hamilton, who had a terrible start to his Ferrari career, scoring only 1 point at the Australian Grand Prix. However, when 9-time podium finisher and analyst Martin Brundle labelled Hamilton's Ferrari debut as disappointing, Hamilton argued that progress is on the way with more performance to extract from the Ferrari SF25. Brundle went so far as to call Hamilton's Ferrari debut disappointing by any metric and questioned his angsty approach towards new race engineer Riccardo Adami. However, following the race, Hamilton remarked that Riccardo did a really good job and that they are learning about each other bit by bit, with Ferrari and team principal Fred Vasseur taking steps to improve communication protocols for this weekend's Chinese Grand Prix. It was not the issue of Lewis. It was the issue of the team, Vasseur added. We need to find the level of communication between the team, the drivers, and engineers. And as Hamilton and Ferrari continue to improve that aspect of the performance, Hamilton believes he can get more speed out of the SF25 with a smarter approach. Hamilton remarked after a rain-soaked Australian GP, "I'm glad I got through it, and I came out with a little bit of things, at least that's 1 point. Obviously didn't go off or spin today, but lacking pace for sure. But I do believe the car has more performance than we were able to extract this weekend. It was even less performance, for example, in the race, but I think it's all settings." The race weekend had been dry until race day, which Hamilton said reset his process of getting up to speed. "I definitely made a step," he said on his performance in the dry at Melbourne. "I think just for me, it was just confidence. It's like just building confidence. From the moment I got in the car on Friday, I didn't have the confidence, particularly in all the high speed. I was down a huge amount. Then, into Saturday, confidence was coming back, was building. And then we got to the race, and again, starting from scratch, and I didn't have any confidence through pretty much most of the race. But I think in the settings as well, the car was very tricky." Hamilton was asked what he would have done differently if he could have another go at his first Ferrari race weekend, after making another reference to the settings of the Ferrari SF25. Many things, he answered. "I think setup-wise would set the car up just a lot different and position the car different in different parts of the race. Different calls." Ferrari made a deliberate decision to stay out when heavy rain fell late in the Australian Grand Prix. Hamilton and Charles Leclerc would advance up the order, but as the rain fell, Liam Lawson and Gabriel Bortoleto crashed. The safety car was deployed. Ferrari called their drivers in, and podium positions were relegated to the bottom reaches of the top 10. "In the last sector, everyone was going off, but I was managing to hold it on," said Hamilton. "So, I was just passing people. And once we got past the start line, it was dry, so I was like, this is fine for me. I can hold this out. Only got a few more laps to go. But then it pelted down just in I think the last 2 laps. Started coming down. That's the moment we should have probably come in." McLaren's Lando Norris eventually won the Australian Grand Prix, holding out Red Bull's Max Verstappen in a battle to the finish line, with Mercedes' George Russell rounding out the podium. But this week, it's possible to see 1 or 2 Ferraris on the podium, as the team has learned a lot from the Australian Grand Prix. But will those small changes and setup details make enough of a difference for Ferrari and Hamilton to challenge McLaren? What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below.